I'll just start by saying, as you would be aware by now, that we are recording this session because for anyone who's unable to make it, we like to share on our YouTube channel, and maybe you want to go back and rewatch it. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Tara Wickwire, Brand and Network Lead with Sandpiper Ventures, and we, as a fund, we are on a mission to bring greater diversity to the VC space. We're an all-woman VP-led fund, investing exclusively in women identifying, and non-binary founders. So we currently have 11 investments. So we often are thinking about the ways that we can bring knowledge and draw on our network to bring greater guidance to our companies and founders in general across Canada. So thank you everyone for joining us today. This is our Founder Essentials Masterclass 2.0. So we had probably many of you were able to join our first iteration of this, but we're glad to kick off the next version. So today we have with us Jen McCain. And Jen is president of Irie Capital Corporation, a privately held investment and holding company. She has an MBA with a major in corporate social responsibility and sustainability from Simmons University in Boston, and a bachelor's degree in business management with a major in entrepreneurship and innovation from Dalhousie. Jen is a director on the McCain Food Group Holding Board director at Kennebec Investments, and also serves as the vice chair of board of directors for Friends of Ruby, the Toronto-based transitional house and drop-in center for LGBTQ2S+ youth. Jen has served on numerous boards, including the McCain Foundation Board and Board of Canada's National Ballet Schools. Jen is a member of The Impact, a global membership community of families committed to aligning their assets with their values, and part of the LGBT Global Circle of Human Rights Watch. And Jen also sits on the campaign cabinet for Kids Help Phone, the largest fundraising effort for youth mental health in Canadian history. So we obviously have a brilliant community builder and a governance expert with us today. So I will hand it over to Jen. She will give the presentation, and then we'll certainly make time for questions and answers, Q&A at the end of the session. So welcome, and thank you, Jen, for being with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. Let me pull up my presentation here. And hopefully this works without any issues. Right. Can you see it? All good? Do you see
Perfect. To board or not to board? That looks like the right presentation.
Looks like the right presentation.
Thanks, Jen.
Well, all right, I'm just going to move it so I can see some of the group here and get the gallery view so I can get more engaged here. Well, thanks for having me this afternoon. I love what Sandpiper is doing, and really, really honored to be here and chat. And I'll keep it, short, because I like they're a smaller group. We can make it a dynamic conversation towards the end, do a little bit of level setting, and then maybe have more of an open discussion. The only correction I have is in terms of the intro is I wouldn't say I'm an expert. At the moment anyone says they're an expert in governance, I think they've lost the plot, because it's such a dynamic practice that that once you claim that, I think you're not learning, and I myself continually learning, and hope to be a teacher on the topic today, but by no means an expert. Okay, so this is kind of my Atlantic coast theme here with the ship. I love analogies, and I want to keep this presentation engaging. And so we're gonna use this analogy of a ship and all things nautical throughout the presentation. So if the analogy gets overused, just feel free to tell me to stop, and I'll switch my my anecdote to something else. But this is what I'd like to cover today. Really, just talking about what is governance. When do you need it? Who's it for? And how to govern responsibly. So not just how to govern, but how to govern responsibly, and then open for some reflections and questions at the end. Can everyone hear me okay? Perfect. Okay. So, at its core, I think it's important to cushion governance within the broader context of what everyone talks about today, which is, of course, ESG. So environmental, social, and governance related criteria. Governance seems to have the most buzz. It has probably been the most built out in terms of the ESG, but there's still a lot to sort of learn in the governance space, and also understand how it is connected to environmental and social criteria as well. So I think we just talk about the G all the time. The E and S are also very important. So really want to kind of broaden out the definition before we take a deeper dive. So, oops, I went overhead. 1 sec here. It's hard to see the gallery and also navigate a presentation here. So, okay, there we go. Took you through. Oh, it doesn't like that. Give me 1 second. Going back and forth. Give me 1 sec here, folks. Okay. You know, I'm going to just make this screen zoom back out here. Give me 1 sec. Tarek, you know, it might be easier if I send it to you and then you navigate.
Sure thing.
Is that okay?
Yeah, certainly.
Okay. Hopefully it sends in a, actually, you know what? Let me give it one more go, because I don't even know if it's going to send, because all my pictures of ships are probably making the file size too big.
Okay. Well,
Okay, let's try again.
Yep, that's perfect.
Good. Okay. I think I figured it out. Okay. So we've talked about ESG. Now we're going to look at the definition. So if we zone in on the G, this is the kind of the textbook definition of what governance is. So we've got a system of rules, practices, and processes, which a firm is directed by. So it seems like a simple construct. In reality, it's all of these things, and navigating all these different components of governance is quite challenging. So you've got to consider culture, you got to consider the board, you got to consider the management team, you got to consider, you know, what risks there are, you've got to consider the different stakeholders. There's a bunch of different pieces of governance, so it makes the governance landscape quite complex to navigate. So I'm going to try and unpack it for the next 20 minutes, but this conversation is ongoing, of course. So key components. So if we look at governance, if you were to conceptualize it in a three-dimensionality sort of construct, I use the ship analogy, but if you were to ask someone at Deloitte or another professional service firm, this is how they would categorize it. So these are the kind of the different components of governance. So we've got the structure, we've got the oversight and responsibilities, talent and culture, and infrastructure. So if you were to take governance, put it in two-dimensional form, this is what the framework would look like. And really what it is just a mechanism used to help the management team, the board, the senior leadership team build out policies, practices, procedures within a structure. And different sizes of corporations, different sizes of ventures are going to have different iterations of what this looks like. And there is no one size fits all approach. So I think it's important to really emphasize that if you've seen one governance model, you've seen one governance model. Every single organization is going to interpret this very differently within their system. So this is kind of the general construct. Oh, my presentation is doing it again. We'll figure it out hopefully at some point here. There we go. Okay. So when do you need it? I think it's important to take a holistic view about governance and understand what you're trying to implement and why. So the first step in that process is to start kind of with intention and break it down into three pieces, right? What works for you currently? What does not serve you well and you could do without? And what would you ask for if you could? So if you're coming into any new situation as a founder, as an investor, and you're looking to assess, refine, improve the governance structure, take a look and see what the system currently has and how you want to refine that. Don't go immediately to the what. I think a lot of people make that mistake and they first come into a new organization, new team, and say, we need this. They forget the why. So I love this golden circle by Simon Sinek. It's one of the tools that I use in everything, particularly in governance, to start with why. Why are you doing this? Then figure out the how and then the what. And you can use this kind of assessment tool on the why, how, what in the context of governance when you're building out your model, whatever works for you. And this presentation is not going to be what works for you. I'm just trying to frame different ideas or approaches because every organization is really unique. So this takes different shapes depending on size, scale, maturity, etc. So this is one of my favorite formulas, just in general. So when we look at governance, especially as a new venture, part of the challenge is to what level do you implement these tools and processes and systems? And what is the willingness of the group that you're looking at building these governance practices or principles for? And in a sort of in a founder-led venture, you may say, okay, well, you know, I've built this on my own. I know exactly how things run. I know what the governance protocols are. I know exactly what to do. So there can be kind of a resistance to change, either from the founder, or from the investor, or from any various stakeholder group. So I love to kind of just frame this in a way of, if you're looking at adopting something from a governance perspective, whether it's a new, like I said, new policy, new protocol, new process, the dissatisfaction with what you're currently doing, times the vision of what you'd like, times the first steps have to, in aggregate, outweigh the resistance to that change. And that's how you can move the needle on implementing these governance related decisions. And you'll find that a lot. A lot of times when you want to bring a new tool or trick, people are totally averse to it. And so you really have to go back and really unpack the intention and then focus on these sort of steps and creating critical mass behind that change that you're trying to roll it into an organization. So I love this formula as well to talk about governance. So when you're looking at the governance structure, we're going to go back to our ship analogy here, and I've tried to articulate the different folks that are on the ship here. So if we were to take all the different roles and use our ship analogy, this is how I would kind of view it. So we've got the ship owner is obviously the shareholders or investors. Some of you may be on the call. We've got the founder, might have some founders on the call as well. The shipbuilder, then you got the captain, typically the chairperson, who is, you know, electing management to run the organization. You've got the Coast Guards, who are the board of directors. So they're the ones that are kind of figuring out where the rocks are, or where the shores, you know, where the shores are a little rocky. Got the CEO, who's the sales. They're the one that are really kind of the idea generating, forward momentum type person. Got your CFO, who's the rudder, who's steering often the CEO to say, slow down, you got to go this way, you got to go that way, or you got to stay the course. And then you've got the crew. And whenever I think about governance, I'm always very conscious of who's on board, or who's not on board, or who needs to be on board, and understanding those roles and how they all work together. So you'll have a lot of these natural tensions in this system of who's on board, and unpacking that is critical in terms of advancing the governance agenda. Sometimes you'll have, you know, the founder that doesn't get along with the owner, for example. You say, well, it's my ship. You know, you're just the person that built it, or you're just the person that's steering the ship, or you're just the rudder, right? And so really appreciating each other's perspectives and trying to align those interests to have a clear path forward is hard. But that's why I've got this new change formula to help advance that agenda. So, and I will circulate this deck after if you'd like to review it. In terms of some of these critical stakeholders in the system, we've got these three sort of circles that we're working with. And most governance related policies or practices will hit these groups, whether it's an operational practice or a board level practice or policy. There will be some interaction with these three stakeholder groups. And I like this circle because it shows you where there's overlap and where there is not overlap. And in a new venture or a new system, these things often don't look like a nice Venn diagram. They look like a bundled up ball that doesn't have clear, defined roles and responsibilities. And this is one of the hardest challenges, especially as you are a founder-led venture and you're looking to increase your governance structure, is understanding who's going to take on what role. So I was talking to someone the other day that was having a challenge. The CEO was the founder. They stepped back, brought in a new CEO, and then they wanted to sort of maintain their role as an owner, but they kept on confusing that boundary between being owner and a manager, and would step in a very disruptive way that really didn't allow that CEO or that hired management to actually manage. And there's a saying, let the managers manage. And so if you don't have these good guardrails or these paths forward in order to advance whatever you're looking to achieve as an organization, it can be very problematic. And so finding the balance of guardrails you put in place for each of these groups is a bit of a finessing and a bit of a process and a bit of a give and take. Some people want to go all the way and, like I said, implement everything under the sun. So I want this policy, and I want this practice, and I want this protocol, and I want this authority limit, and I want really clear boundaries around X, Y, Z. And what I like to say is don't let the tail wag the dog. And what I mean by that is you have to really think about the whole system and not just let governance for the sake of governance affect your path forward. And so maintaining sensitivity with each of these groups is really important, and knowing when to engage with what group and what capacity is challenging. And the only way you can do it is just by doing it, but you'll learn as you go. So in terms of those three different groups, owners, managers, and the board of directors, I'm going to double click on the board of directors, because whenever we talk about governance, we just think board. And important to understand that it occurs at various levels through the organization, but for all intents and purposes, the board kind of sets the policies which govern the managers, and then the managers will of course enact those within an organization. So the board really has four roles: oversight, insight, foresight, and hindsight. And to be a good board, whether it's formal or not, whether it's a group of, advisors or a group of stakeholders that you brought together that help give you decisions, it doesn't have to be anything formal. The key is balancing these four dimensions. So one, to exercise oversight, one to, look in hindsight and take learnings, one to gather insights, but most importantly, one to focus on going forward. And a board should be future oriented, and really emphasizing the foresight piece. And a lot of boards or a lot of advisor groups, they'll get stuck kind of 80% on managing what's already happened. And you really want to make sure that you are as someone in the highest levels of governance at a board managing forward. So the foresight, oversight, insight, and hindsight are kind of the four different dimensions on that front. Okay, so what does a board do? This is, again, my ship analogy. The board has to sail through a very narrow channel with a very narrow view of the surroundings, using a potentially outdated chart, yet expected to look forwards, upwards, up and down, all while moving towards a massive cargo tanker with the goal of safe passage. So this gives you an appreciation of what the board's job is. And it's a tricky one. There is an expectation to have a very broad understanding of a business with a very narrow view, often through the manager or the CEO. And so that sometimes can cause friction, because you've got a management team that's working on this business every day. And, you're founder led, you are living and breathing this. You've got a board that you feel doesn't understand because they don't live and breathe it every day. And then you've got investors who are just kind of supporting the organization, but you feel don't have a true sense. But the board's job is to do exactly this. And there's people that are qualified to do this. You just have to find the right folks within your ecosystem that can help you do this. And if you have a really good board, you'll be able to spot the cargo tanker and you'll be able to navigate around it successfully. But only if you have all the right people on that ship when you're sailing through these kinds of dynamics. So I promise I won't go on too long about the ship, the pieces that we're nearing towards the end. So I think that's the last of the metaphor there. But just wanted to kind of wrap it up with how to govern in a few slides, which is an impossible exercise, but I will try. So when you're navigating, I think there's a couple different things to focus on. First and foremost, governance has to have good governors, good actors. So if you've got, a bunch of governance related systems and mechanisms, but you don't have people that are responsibly acting in the best interest through those mechanisms, it defeats the purpose of governance. So you can have all of these great things on paper that you can point to and say, look at all of the pieces of governance that I have. I'm doing such a good job. But if you don't have a responsible set of individuals that are managing those, then you're not in a good position. It's not a one size fits all approach. And a lot of times you'll see somebody come in and say, okay, well, you need to implement X, Y, Z and do this. That's what the board that I was on, or that's what the last venture I was involved with, or that's what the last company when I was a CEO, that's what they did. That's what you should do. And it's a conversation. It's not a how-to guide, and then you can just export it into your organization. So there's no one size fits all, which is why I hope this presentation is helpful because it's giving insights, but there is no how-to guide for governance. At least in my view, you have to have the right skill set around the table. So whoever's on board, whether it's the person who's leading the organization as the CEO, whether that's the founder, who is not often one and the same, whether you're an investor, you have to have the right skill set. So finding people that complement your skill set is critical, and also people that will say no. You don't want to surround yourself with a group of yes folks. That doesn't move the needle or challenge you at all. And then, most importantly, from a director perspective, and also just as a good manager, you have kind of two legal obligations. And those are your fiduciary duty and your duty of care. And those things you'll hear at the board level, because it is a legal requirement that you act in the best interest of the corporation. It's also just the right thing to do. And the duty of care piece is that any director or any person who's in a governance related role should act in a prudent and responsible way, as anyone would in such a circumstance. And I believe that that's a great set of criteria to live by as a director, but I also think it's aligned to what a CEO's interest would be as well, or a founder's interest. You have to act in the best interest of the company. So that's the other piece. And then the goal of all of this is to implement reasonable processes, policies, and protocols that support the forward momentum of your organization. So whatever you do, you want to ensure that this is helping enhance the productiveness of your venture or your business, or your organization. And it's not handcuffing the founders or the investors. There's sort of glass half full, glass half empty. Some people say, as a founder, like I alluded to at the beginning, why would I add these policies and protocols? Because now I have to get your permission to do something. Or you could look at it like, I don't need your permission. I can just do it because I understand that it's within my rights, because it's within the protocols. So you don't need to ask for permission. That comes up all the time. You see lots of very, very large organizations that have very, very poor governance structures, and it does not end up well. It often will land you on the headline of the newspapers. And we've seen many examples of large crypto currency related organizations that have this founder that says, don't handcuff me at all. Let me do what I want. And the best way to help a founder or to help an investor or to help all those people that are on board is to give them tools to move the organization forward in a productive way. So this is the last sort of slide here, and then we can open up to a broader discussion. But this is the 4 kind of components that I alluded to at the beginning in terms of the structure, oversight, talent and culture, and infrastructure. So if you wanted a framework for implementing governance, this is the framework. And I thought it was important to at least address it because it's in the title of the presentation. So this is a great tool to be able to contextualize that 3D model of governance as an operating mechanism into a chart. But hopefully we can talk through some examples and start to bring this to life for the balance of the masterclass, if that works for everybody. So that was only my formal remarks there, and happy to open it up to the group.
Jen, thank you so much. Excellent. And so many insights and very visual and effective guideposts for all of us. And I know you have different companies at different stages, sort of different iterations on where they might be in governance for their company, but this is all very useful. And I think just that key message of managing for the future, managing forward and momentum is a really important message. So thank you for all of that, all of that wonderful content. But I will offer, yeah, if anyone has questions, love to hear them. I'm sure there are a few. Yeah, Justin.
Yeah, thank you for that. I have a question that may be beyond the scope of what's today. So maybe more I'm asking for further reading or where you would suggest I go to get this question answered. But it's more around like equity for a board, right? So we're at the early stage, and I have 3 mentors of mine that I've known for some upwards of a decade that are very heavily involved in the ecosystem that I'm going to be operating in, that I want on my board. But then it's like tricky to figure out like the logistics in terms of actual, like, equity, and then comparing that to what my expectations of them in terms of, how often we meet and what types of duties may come. So if you have any tips on how to maybe explore that any further.
Just to clarify, Justin, you mean in terms of compensation for directors or equity in terms of their place in the business?
Yeah, like compensation, like a percentage of the company, let's say.
Yeah, so there's a couple ways to do it. The traditional approach would be kind of board director fees, right? So if you have individuals that you feel like you're at a place where the business can dedicate a percentage towards director fees, you can find comparable sizes of businesses in similar industries and see what they're kind of paying for equity or compensation as a director. A lot of times as well, of course, if you're an investor in the business, you get a board seat, so you don't really need you don't need a board director fee, because you would assume that your contribution as a director will help improve the company. And then, when the business, if you make an exit as an investor, that's kind of where you make your money. A lot of times too, you may have an advisor or an individual that is appointed by somebody else. For example, a VC firm, and they may not require compensation because this is part of their duty as their employment under the VC firm. So there's kind of very different ways, and so I would just say look to other organizations, see what the comparables are. And then also understand who's around your table and how they're currently compensated. Like I said, whether they've got an equity position, whether they're working for a VC and this is part of their job, kind of understand that. And then you can propose a structure that would ultimately be adopted by the board. It can be a meeting fee. It doesn't have to be an annual retainer. It can just be, a stipend per meeting. That's often how people will sort of start on that journey.
Great question. And Justin, what was the name of your company, just so we can know that?
Yep. Our company is called Food Web Asset Mapping Incorporated.
Very cool.
Very early. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. You're thinking ahead. And we had a comment in the chat from Andrea Campbell. I understand one of the going rates is 0.5 to 1% for equity for mentors. Okay, great stuff. Okay, other questions? Maybe I'll just, actually, I had one that kind of came to mind as you were speaking, Jen, and maybe I'll just throw that out there. I think when it comes to recruiting for the board, and when you're identifying people to join your board or help form your board, any advice, outside of investors who would take a board seat, other recommendations you'd make in building structure of your board or identifying good candidates for the board?
Yeah, so there's lots of different portals where you can either post your resume to be a director, or you as a founder can look for directors who have their resumes posted. So it's kind of a two-way invitation, if you will. So there's lots of different governance related organizations like Institute for Corporate Directors. There's Boardsy, you often see postings on Kijiji. They're looking, not Kijiji, excuse me, on Indeed. I wouldn't find a board director on Kijiji.
Maybe Kijiji, yeah.
I would steer away from there, but you might find it.
Facebook Marketplace.
Yeah, Facebook Marketplace. I would go to it. Yeah. There's lots of different think tanks where you may meet some advisors that might take an interest in your industry or your business, or you as a founder. Often they just, you'll find people that are kind of in a semi-retired place and they want to get experience, so you can tap on their shoulders. It never hurts to go outside your network and just ask. Whether that's through LinkedIn or other sources, friends of a friend say, I saw your resume. I think you'd be a great fit for my board. This is what I'm building. Here's where my company's at. And a lot of these people that are doing this, you shouldn't be a director for the money. In my view, you should be a director because you want to help the organization. And so you'll find some really qualified candidates that are just looking to help advance the ecosystem because they're passionate about the business, or they're passionate about what the founder's vision is.
True. Okay, so I see a question in the chat from one of our GPs, Kathy. So any insights you want to share about dealing with issues where directors aren't aligned or management and directors are misaligned? How important is the chair role in conflict resolution, if at all?
Asking the tough questions there, Kathy. Well, okay, so there's a few different practices I think that are really helpful when you're going through a challenging dynamic at the board level with management, is to do a lot of pre and post conversations before or after a meeting, just to assess what the individual directors or individual stakeholders are seeing. And then when you have that insight, you go into the board meeting understanding what the temperature is around the table, and that can change the tone of how you navigate that conversation. Typically at the board level, a good chairperson is not taking up a ton of airtime. They're just directing the conversation. So they've already done a lot of that conflict resolution offline, and then they're just trying to build consensus at the board level. But when there is extreme misalignment, especially if it was the board and the CEO, what happens is often, that there's an exit of management if they can't reach a resolution, because the management team has to have the full confidence of the board, and the board has to be confident in of course, the leadership. So if they are not confident, often there's an exit, because it could be by competency that there's a conflict, or could be a personality related conflict. But there has to be alignment, and when there isn't, then you've got to kick in those negotiating conflict resolution skills that is perhaps another masterclass in itself.
Okay, excellent. It could be our next one. So another question here. So this is from our other GP, Sarah Young. Jen, you said at the outset, you were constantly learning about governance. So what are your best resources or sources for this? Like, do you have podcasts or reading or maybe real life experience? Like, where would be the places that people could go to, to learn and improve on governance knowledge and best practices?
There's so much information out there today, so that's actually a good question. What the best resources are is a lot of them, I would say, aren't fully vetted. So you want to stick to the more credible, well-known institutions. Like an Institute for Corporate Directors, they push out a lot of great content. The professional service firms, Deloitte's, KPMG's, PwC's, they have a lot of great content, white papers, resources, webinars, etc. Lots of institutions as well focus on this. So one of the best, and obviously you've got Harvard that has a lot of governance related research they publish, or Kellogg University based out of Chicago. They've got a lot of really good material on this. And then in terms of podcasts, I don't have one off the top of my head. I know there's tons, so I would just focus on making sure that they're vetted first in terms of a credibility perspective, because now especially with media and TikTok, you take everything as fact. When you hear it on a podcast, for some reason, our brain takes it as fact. It's not a podcast, it must be true. So I would just make sure you're kind of vetting those sources.
Okay, that's great. Shelley, you had a question.
Yeah, I want to go back to the question about equity for board members, because I actually didn't realize that was a thing. So you don't know what you don't know, right? How common is that board members are compensated with equity?
So I would say in the for-profit world would be more common than not-for-profit. Most not-for-profits would not compensate. More mature boards would be higher on the comp scale versus newer venture startups. They wouldn't necessarily compensate as heavily. It really honestly depends on the maturity and the profitability of the venture as well, right? If you've got a startup and you're trying to build the business, it's probably not in the best interest of the directors to take a salary if it's not acting in the best interest of the corporation.
Right.
Right. So it really depends. And there's actually an entire field, an industry and professional service around how to compensate in general, whether you're a manager or a board director. And so there's lots of research that will kind of show you where the ranges are. And really seasons direct. So there's the consulting firm, Hugeson Consulting, that's exclusively what they do, for example.
Okay.
There are tons of folks that work on compensation. But like I said, that's mostly for managers. That's a trickier thing. For directors, it's generally, just a flat rate fee or a per meeting fee, or, if you're on a committee, sometimes they'll pay for subcommittees as well. But it varies from company to company. Also private versus public, there's going to be differences as well. Because there's more scrutiny, obviously, if you're a public organization in terms of what you're paying the directors, it's disclosed in the MD&A, or it's disclosed, how much directors are paying. So if you're paying a director of a public company $1 million, shareholders probably aren't going to like that very much. So it really depends.
Thank you. Thanks, Jen.
No problem.
Great. Do you have any other questions? Group, these are great.
I have one more question. I've been on the board of quite a few nonprofits over the years, so I have some experience in that regard. But now that I'm starting a venture and kind of entering the for-profit space, I'm just wondering if you have any sort of suggestions on how to, how do I frame this? I guess just knowing that, like, as other people come in, even if they have a small piece of equity on the board, they're then have like a financial stake. So kind of like managing that kind of like financial pressure, because like that'd be so different than like the nonprofit space where you're focused just on the mission, but now it's like the mission plus profitability, and just how to, I don't know if that's a clear question. I guess I'm just like feeling some anxiety around like that, like financial expectation, right? Like the company has to be profitable. And then the more voices and stakeholders that come in that are also expecting that, you know?
Oh, sorry, yes, I mean, I think it sounds like it's a question around managing expectations with the different stakeholders. I would say if you're earlier on in your venture and there's one particular stakeholder that's really pressuring you to make a decision, I would use that maybe the Simon Sinek circle and understand why. So you know the what, they want more money or they want to be directed. So I would focus on the why, and try and understand. Especially as an investor, to put undue pressure on a founder for something like comp I would say that's the wrong fit from my view, but I'd have to know more. They should be focused exclusively on supporting the venture going forward, and then understanding, like I said, if they've invested and the company's doing well, they're going to make more on the exit than they will ever would in director's fees. So it shouldn't be the primary motivation for any director. It's actually a conflict of interest to sort of be paid handsomely, in my view, in order to be a director, because then you're not acting in the best interest of the corporation, you're acting in your best interest. So that defies the exact duty of what a director is obligated to do. So I would just have a conversation, it sounds like, in terms of expectations and understanding where they're coming from and why, what their intention is. That's a good answer. That got the heart there. That's good.
You got the heart, Jen. That's a good sign, boy.
That's a good sign. I need that love after my horrible my presentation skills trying to navigate through a deck. That was I apologize for everybody having to go along on that journey.
Oh, listen, Jen, you gave us a ton of incredible insights, and we will be. We've already had requests. People want to see the presentation, I think, watch this recording back. So we will share that. And I know there are people who couldn't make the session who will want to view it as well. But we are really grateful for your time today, Jen. And we will be making a gift to Friends of Ruby for your time.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, certainly put a lot of thought and effort into this, and was just the perfect sort of overview that we needed as a group, which will, I know, help everyone kind of advance. I learned a ton personally, and I think everyone around the virtual table has as well. So appreciate that very much. And nice to have you in Halifax.
Yes. If it was a little sunnier out, but I'll take it. Is when the moment I get to post, everything just is a little more calmer and smoother, and you get good perspective. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it very much, and happy to continue the conversation, and we'll circulate the slides in the correct order so that you can unpack what I was saying a little bit further.
Okay. We will. Yes, people love the analogy, Jen. So wonderful, and it makes it stick. It's very vivid and visual, especially the slide with all the roles. I will use that though. Very powerful. So thank you everyone for attending. Appreciate having our GPs, Kathy and Sarah, here with us as well today. And all of you, if you, for the next session, we will be having Susie Martins, and she is founder and CEO of Advise to Rise. She's an experienced chief people officer and operations executive. She's worked with Clearco and Apply Board. And this session will take place on August 1st at 4 p.m. Atlantic. And it will all be all about doing less with less and being focused on your HR and talent strategy. And Susie is a dynamo just like Jen. So we hope you can join us for that. We will circulate the information. So we will move to the topic of talent for our next one. But hopefully this is something you can enjoy. We picked this time slot intentionally thinking Tuesday. We didn't want to do them Fridays in the summer at 4 o'clock. So we hopefully that Tuesday. So thank you for your participation and engagement. And always, stay in touch with Sandpaper Ventures. We are here as a resource. And I will send a note to our social channels once this is posted to YouTube. You can enjoy it. Thank you all.